G'day, welcome to Lunch Money, where special situations, commercial finance, business growth advisors, and cash flow forecasting specialists gather to give us their views on the latest business events in the news cycle. My name's Nick Samios. I'm the Director and Fund Manager here at Hermes Capital, and I'm your host. So once again, welcome. Today, the glass is half full. We've had a lot of gloom, but today we're looking for the silver lining on the clouds, and we're focusing on the pivot. We're hearing a lot of people use this word pivot. Politicians are using it, and we're hearing business commentators talk about it, whether it's pivoting industries or, in our case, we're going to be talking about pivoting business models, pivoting businesses. Why do businesses need to pivot? As we've had this COVID situation, buyer behaviours have been changing, and one has to wonder whether or not some of those changes in buyer behaviours because of COVID circumstances are actually going to become rusted on new habits, whether or not behaviours have changed permanently, the way people do things. Demand for certain products has dropped. Demand for other products and services on the flip side has increased. There's challenges in supply chain. Certain supply chain weaknesses have been found out, and businesses are looking to rely less on the way they've done things in the past. There's challenges with capital availability, of course, and people are having to do more with less. And there's a lot of pressure, of course, to take the costs out of businesses. And all of these things are putting pressure on businesses to pivot, and pivot's the buzzword. So today I have two panelists who are joining us, experts in their fields of both cash flow forecasting and business advisory, advising for turnarounds, but also for businesses that are going through growth and changing their business models. I'm going to start off by introducing Michael Ford from Castaway Forecasting. G'day, Michael. How are you going?
Nick, how are you going?
Fantastic. Really great to have you on. Before we started this podcast, before we even had episode 1, Michael and I have sort of been talking about doing this together, and at long last, we get together. I've known you for many years, and I remember you from when you were a special educator with the CPA, and now you've got this product, Castaway, the Castaway Forecasting, and it's amazing how more and more I'm hearing people mention it. I was watching a webinar the other day, and someone was saying you need to do a three-way model, and something like Castaway is the best to do that. How did Castaway come about?
Long time ago. We launched this in September 2010. The idea of it really, as an accountant, I came through KPMG and PW, and whenever we had to do a budget or a forecast, we were straight to Excel. And there was no continuity, no consistency. People had different methods. And it was hard to do much more than just a P&L forecast. So I got involved after leaving the profession, got involved in coaching some entrepreneurs, and found we needed some tools. Three-way modeling was something just dawned on me. I found out about it through an old product called Win Forecast. And working with some businesses, we figured we needed something more powerful. There's the encapsulated story of it all, but I assumed as an accountant there would be a ton of tools like this out there in the world, and was surprised to find there wasn't. Tools that made it easy to produce a P&L forecast, convert that into a balance sheet and cash flow forecast, and then use it for scenario modeling and the like. Tools that actually help answer the questions that CEOs are really asking. There was a gap in the market. We thought we should jump in.
Look, I remember years ago. I guess it was probably around the time you were developing this. We'd be looking at a business, and one of our advisors would say, "Listen, you should ask them for a three-way." And back in those days, three-way forecasts were a bit of a black art. And you'd ask accountants for them, and they'd sort of nod as if they knew what you were talking about. But look, we'll come to more about the nuts and bolts of forecasting and the important role, obviously, it plays. What keeps you busy? What keeps you busy these last week or so?
This week, I've had the whole range of experiences. We've just signed off on a record sales month and a sales quarter here at Castaway. We're doing a huge amount of work and business over in the UK, a lot in Australia as well.
Wow,
as accountants, bankers, investors are all starting to ask for three-way modelling, and thankfully, what you're talking about, Castaway being on the lips of people, is that's really helped drive our business over the last several months. That's been wonderful. In the office here, we've just signed off on a refurbishment of the office to reorganize it around the idea of collaborative or being a collaborative creative workspace. So in
Yeah.
response to COVID, we can't just have rows of desks anymore. We've got to turn this into a place where people can come collaborate but do it safely. That's been a shift in mentality. The third thing, I think, I own a gym as well as a side investment in a gym, and we opened 2 weeks ago. And that's slowly starting to build back up. But what we're finding is it's hard to get great staff because they're all very happy on JobSeeker at the
Yeah.
moment. So there are
Mm.
these practicalities. So yeah, it's been we've had the feast and famine in all in the same week.
I guess it's interesting with the gym. That's one of those areas where you're probably a little bit vulnerable to people changing their habits and staying changed. I mean, are you finding people are coming back? How's that working out?
Some are. I mean, the old saying, it takes 30 days to make a habit, and you can break it even more quickly.
Yeah.
Over COVID, a lot of people started to exercise in different ways. They found different methods. So we expect we won't get all of our members back. At the
Mm.
same time, we've got a few people who've gone into hibernation over COVID. So it's almost like another New Year's Eve or a New Year's resolution period where we get lots of members coming in.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that COVID, you certainly get the extra love handles through COVID.
There's more
So
of us to go around.
Yeah, exactly. And I know myself, I mean, you can do what you can at home, but there's nothing like throwing around a heavy bar or jumping on on an ergo, and you can only do that at the gym unless you've got plenty of money. So
Yeah,
I'm sure
that's right.
eventually it'll all come back. All right. Well, look, we'll introduce our next panelist. So just we'll put you on hold there, Michael, and we will get Jamie Holroyd on. And Jamie joins us from WA. Jamie was one of our first guests way back when, in the beginning of COVID, when we started this. How are you going, Jamie?
We're doing very well, Nick. Very well. So,
For those that missed out on our second episode, Jamie has a business called Stratosphere, and he's consults on helping businesses grow. I guess you do both growth and turnaround. You've got a corporate finance background, and I guess you're bringing that expertise to the table. And what keeps you busy these last little while?
look, we've been really busy. We just like Michael, we've had a record June, but people ask me how we're going. But that June is probably the culmination of 12 to 18 months' work, which just happened to culminate in June. So we've been doing a lot of work in industry roll-ups. We're working on two at the moment. What we've found is that businesses that are struggling, that have had a hard time, their best way to extract value is to sell to a competitor. And the larger players are looking to build scale, and they're using scale to build greater efficiency. So that's something we've been doing a lot of.
Wow.
There've been really good transactions, both for the buyer and the seller.
Those sorts of things. That thing of the industry roll-up, and you said the bigger players are looking to grow, I guess, through acquisition. That's how's COVID affected that?
Well, I think that's actually accelerated it. We've had the costs have been high. In WA, we've probably had a little bit of a flatter economy for a while, and businesses have been struggling along. And I think COVID, the liquidity that's been put in the market with JobSeeker and JobKeeper and low interest rates, superannuation release, has meant that a number of businesses are suddenly doing a lot better, and they've taken that as the opportunity to reorganise and step up or step out.
I mean, I noticed the Queensland government is loaned $1 billion under a special program, maximum loans of 250 grand. No repayments at all, no interest or principal for the first 12 months. I mean, all of that sort of stuff. When you add JobKeeper and the other concessions to it, I guess the wise play is to do something now while you've got that, and not wait until it all runs out.
Well, look, I think that we're at the critical moment now where we go into this crisis. No one really knows where it's going. It's a little bit nerve-wracking, but I think the threat of the cash payments ending in circa 3 months means that people need to decide now what they're going to do after that, and there is no real certainty. It makes it difficult.
And so, have you got? You've had a pipeline before COVID, and what sort of new stuff's come into the pipeline since?
Look, that's really interesting. That what we're finding is people need to make a decision, as I said, to get in or get out. And we've had a couple of people that we've spoken to for a while who've been struggling along and outline their options to them. And it's been interesting in terms of sometimes their decision to try and make a broken business model work. And I think it is, whether it's a pride issue, whether it's a stress issue, unwillingness to confront challenges. But as I said, there seems to be a new level of optimism. We've seen some really great pivoting from a few businesses, and I get quite inspired by that. For example, we've got a hospitality and recreation business, and these people have spent millions on an expansion they only just finished, and then they run smack into COVID, and they've done some really innovative things. They a very large facility. They have about 80 to 100,000 visitors a year, so they have quite a large car park. And what they did was they turned the restaurant facility around. They built a drive-through pizza service, and in the car park they set up a drive-in, right? And it just created a really wonderful community atmosphere. And
as in the movies,
yeah,
wow.
So,
Cheech and Chong up in smoke, that sort of thing. I mean, I think that's.
Yeah, I've got my other example here of our hand sanitizer. Don't see that local winery started producing hand sanitizer and did that really, really quickly. Yeah, so there's been some great entrepreneurial spirit out there, which is great to see.
And I know you've got a corporate finance background, and you've worked with some major banks. Are you finding yourself how much of it is about working with the directors and the owners, and how much of it is pitching to banks as well?
Oh, look, it's a bit of both, but it's a really interesting time. Banks are very, very reluctant to take action, so we're kind of in this sort of zombie zone. Yeah. But so if you want something productive, it's very slow and very time consuming. So.
Okay, all right. Well, look, we'll bring Michael back. There he is. And I was interested when I mentioned to Jamie that our other guest today was Michael. Jamie said, "Oh, I know Michael really well." So I'm just interested in how you guys work together.
Well, I think one of the things for us is that to understand a business. We find that business owners are typically not on top of their numbers, and we're not talking about the accounting numbers, but when we're talking about accurate gross profit margin assessment, or we're talking about break-even analysis, they either don't know or it's inaccurate, and you actually can't do a forecast unless you understand that sort of information. And much like Michael described, I was a little bit the same. When I left the bank, had to go and build my own three-way forecast in Excel, and when I started doing that, I didn't know if I could actually achieve it. We got there, but very, very difficult to do for all the reasons that Michael outlined, and so we found our way to Castaway, and Michael and I have had a lot of interaction over the last year or two, and it's been a wonderful addition to our product suite.
So I guess, Michael, you've got a lot of things to the Castaway product, but every business is different, of course, and so what, they're picking up the phone to you when they've got a particular conundrum that may not necessarily or not so obviously fit the model. Is that how it works?
Yeah, people come to us when they've got a frustration, their Excel models aren't working, or they're just too costly and expensive to keep going with, or they're starting to not trust the numbers, or where they need some more robustness in their forecasting, where they want to spend more time thinking about scenarios and planning rather than crunching numbers. And people like Jamie, we really love getting in with people who get it, who get the idea of three-way modeling, get the idea of operations-based forecasting, who get the idea of transforming conversations with banks, lenders, or other financiers and businesses, so that the end result is we build a stronger small business community, because people like Jamie support businesses learning for themselves what's going on.
What I should say, and what I probably should have done a little bit earlier, is not everybody who watches us is necessarily an accountant. But when we're talking about a three-way model, we're talking about a model that the three ways are: one is the profit and loss, the balance sheet, and the cash flow. So, in the old days, I remember, as a lender, you'd ask someone for a forecast, and really it was a revenue forecast, and maybe they'd add back a bit of depreciation and call that a cash flow forecast. But of course, then we wanted to see how it affected the balance sheet, and then the cash flow spits out of all of that. So that's just for the non-technical friends. How often? I guess I'll put the question first to you, Michael, and then I'll put it to you, Jamie. How much of cash flow forecasting is for planning, and how much of it is actually a diagnostic in itself?
For me, we have a triangle logo, and one of the reasons for that is we think forecasting is all about three things: learning from the past, finding ways to improve the present, then also finding ways to design a better future. I think you've got to understand understand the mechanics and the dynamics in your business before you can properly do a forecast. I'd say it's both at the same time. It's really a conversation. It's about improving your understanding of how the business works. I don't see any real difference.
And Jamie, when you're sort of going through this process with a client, I mean, how much of it? I mean, is it a case where you discover a lot about the business, or even the client themselves discovers about the business and maybe where they've gone wrong? Or...
Well, look, it's something that I think you described before as a dark art, and that's certainly how it feels. And one of the things that we see is it's very difficult sometimes to explain to people that your business is going to fail with predictable certainty because the numbers don't add up, right? And so it doesn't matter how much goodwill, how much effort, how much passion, it's just not going to work. And it's very easy to. I always say we build a business model from the bottom up, right? So we take the numbers, we take the inputs, which is for us, it's the way that Castaway is structured, and build up the business model from the bottom up rather than the top down. So typically, what happens is a business owner thinks they'll get more revenue and magically money will pour out the bottom. Now, we've certainly been involved with businesses where the natural tendency is to go out and win work. I'm in trouble. I need to turn the business around. I need more revenue. I take on more jobs. Maybe I take them on a thinner margin. And what it actually does, sometimes it exacerbates the working capital issue and it makes it worse. You might be better off to shrink the business, release cash and restructure and go that way. So, and you can tell that with sort of predictable certainty before you start if you've got proper modelling in place.
I guess shrinking the business is one way of pivoting in itself, I suppose.
Well, it depends what you do with that cash. You want the best return on the cash you've got invested in the business.
Yeah, Michael?
Yeah, what you often find is there's businesses where if you look at them from a helicopter view, there is a profitable core, which is a smaller business but it's highly profitable, good return on capital, good cash flow. Yeah. And then there's bits that have been added on over time due to customer demand or people's predilections or opportunities that have been spotted and gone for. And some that have worked, some haven't worked. So some of the pivot is actually stripping the business back, leaning it off to that profitable core and getting back to the basics effectively.
Well, you have beautifully segued into our first news headline for the week. We've only got a couple of headlines this week because we're trying to be focused ourselves. And the big story, of course, is Reborn Virgin pivots to value over elite lounges. So this is the story of Virgin going forward being a little bit like the old Virgin. It was more about value and rather than the high end. So I know, Jamie, you had a few thoughts on this.
Oh, look, I'm not sure you want to get me started on the airline industry. And I think it was Warren Buffett who said that if he saw the Kitty Hawk take off, he would have shot it down, because if you add the total profit of every airline that ever existed, it comes to less than zero. So it's a very, very hard space to win in.
That's interesting. What I did find, I mean, it's interesting. You can break down just that headline: Reborn Virgin pivots to value. I guess, one question is, what is value? I mean, obviously there's bottom line value, but what they do seem to have done, when I look at this article, they surveyed some thousands of users. I didn't get the phone call, but they surveyed a lot of people to try and find out what they like and what they don't like and how important the lounges were to them. I mean, I must say, myself, as someone who's done a fair bit of travel, the lounges, at some point you kind of skip the lounge because, generally, if you're a frequent flyer, you're leaving a meeting as late as you can to run to the airport. You don't have a lot of time for the lounge anyway. But what do you think, Michael? I mean, you were just talking about, you've segued into this with the idea of focusing. I mean, they're talking about having fewer aircraft. I don't know if they're going to have one model like they used to, but they're talking about focusing on the 737s.
Airlines are such difficult things. They're hugely capital intensive. The more complication you add in, the more types of flights, or the more types of planes, the more types of routes, the more add-on services and support you've got to build around the business. If you look at how Virgin got to where it got to, this is almost like a retreat back to 2010. They were a very successful small business, low-cost airline. But then Qantas caught them in a pincer movement. They introduced Jetstar, and then by that point, Virgin was too expensive. Their cost structure was too big to be really a low-cost airline to compete against a leaned-off, non-unionized Jetstar. But they also didn't have the scale to compete against Qantas. They bought John Borghetti in 2010, ex-Qantas guy. he had to choose one way or the other, and he chose to go take Qantas head on in business lounges and the like. Now, the article talks about Virgin only having 4,000 lounge members. That seems a very low number for the amount of investment and noise I've heard.
They all seem to be there whenever I'm there. So
every Friday, correct?
Yeah.
Can never get a free pie.
Yeah.
It seems like, but it's interesting. It's almost like a class. They're starting up a class war, saying it's only the elite who need these lounges now, and they're saying, "Well, we'll go for the everyman," which maybe there's a space for it. I still question they've got a high cost structure. Although Bain coming in, acquiring Virgin for on a lower capital base may give them an opportunity to make return on capital with this method.
Look, I mean, yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, there was an article a little while ago, Chris Corrigan, who I think might have been the CEO or certainly heavily involved back in the Virgin Blue days, and he was strongly advocating, saying, listen, we used to make money. We were very focused. It's a bit of a trap. I mean, again, as a frequent flyer, it's good to, you don't want to switch airlines just because you're going to a different city. So they do need to have broad coverage. And I guess one of the other interesting things here is another one in the promo for today's podcast. I asked a provocative question about how do you see around corners, because part of all of this is we really don't know what the world's going to look like. Maybe aircraft travel, people will come back. When it's going to come back, who knows? We've got a spike in cases in Victoria. We don't know if and when. So, I mean, with that particular challenge in mind, I mean, how do you deal when you're forecasting generally? How do you deal with that challenge of the unknown in the future? I'll start with you, Jamie.
Well, it's interesting. We talk often about what we don't know, but we forget about what we do know, right? We do know that if you're going to run a thin margin, high volume business, you need to execute with precision or you're not going to win, right? So I think that a lot of the talk around Virgin, it is capital intensive. They've struggled for capital. It's hard to see this strategy winning.
Right.
There's a certain number of people that travel domestically and internationally. You know what those numbers are. They're not going to change substantially. So it's how do you make that model win in the short term? And you should be able to do that with a relative sense of predictable certainty. So I know in the past that airlines, where they've looked at the major challenges, now sometimes you can get distracted by asking customers what they want, because sometimes what they say they want and what they actually want are a couple of different things. We know that customers want simplicity. We know that customers hate booking in at the airline and they hate waiting for their baggage. So there has been airlines where you deliver the baggage straight to someone's hotel. That's something that you would actually pay for, and it is more convenient. And people travel a lot, right? You sort of hate that waste of time and standing around. So it's how do you come up with a strategy that predictably should deliver you the results?
Okay, well, look, we might just have a look at the next headline. So this one came from the Wall Street Journal. It was last weekend, and it's about why the American consumer has fewer choices, maybe for good. And again, this is talking about, I guess, narrowing the product range. And we're apparently Harley Davidson is looking at fewer models. There's an example in there about the IGA carrying less lines of toilet paper. What do you think about that, Michael? The idea of businesses sort of reducing their ranges.
I think anyone who's walked down the aisles of even a local Woolies or Coles has been astounded by the amount of choice even we have here in a small market like Australia.
Yeah.
And you've got to think that the economy can't actually support that range of choice. The amount of duplication in back office, in manufacturing, in delivery and logistics it takes to get 27 brands of toilet paper on the shelves is deeply wasteful. However, again, we've got to think about how we got here. We get here because businesses need to create some differentiator. We've gotten to micro-niching effectively, which is where we've got 27 different types of toilet paper that all smell slightly different and feel slightly different.
Yeah.
The consumer has gotten what they've asked for in here, but you've got increasingly marginal bits of business that are being added on to businesses that have presumably got a degree of manufacturing capacity available. I'd be happy. I mean, you see contrast that with the success of something like Aldi. Aldi's done well around the world by having a small number of reasonably decent quality products for a decent price. People aren't overwhelmed with choice, but they've got everything they need. I think choice is tantamount to wealth. We feel wealthy, we feel prosperous if you've got millions of bits of choice, and maybe we've overshot what the market actually needs.
Well, I think Jamie said before that sometimes it's a mistake, to ask the customer what they want. I mean, do they really want 20 different flavors of Tim Tams, for God's sake? I mean, it's not enough that you can choose between Tim Tams and Monte Carlo. You need to choose between, all of those different kinds of Tim Tams. What do you think, Jamie?
Well, one of the things that's interesting is whenever we get involved with a business, one of the first things we do is we break down the revenue composition, and the Pareto rule tends to hold up pretty well in most businesses, that 20% of the customers deliver 80% of the value, and that it's scary how often that holds true. So some of those marginal customers don't really add any value. As you may be aware, we're involved with some large pizza chains at one stage, and 80% of their revenue actually comes from 4 different types of pizzas, right? Even though they've got 20 or 25, and the cost and complication that adds. The other thing is, I think there's a natural business cycle that you reduce the range, become more efficient, streamline things, become more profitable, and then over time, as Michael sort of pointed out, then other people start to add increased offerings that then drags the attention away, and that cycle then expands again. So over my sort of corporate life cycle, I've seen this happen 3 or 4 times, where it's expand, consolidate, expand. So I just see that as a natural sort of evolution. But the one thing that we know is that really successful businesses, as in really successful ones, tend to have a very narrow focus. They do one thing and do it pretty well. It's very difficult to do more than one thing exceptionally well and outcompete other people. We talk a lot about what we call corporate arrogance, and that really is thinking that you can do something that someone else has been doing for years and expect to outperform.
Yeah, I guess there's also that thing that people are good at. I can't remember. There's some special term for it. They've got the Midas touch with one thing, and they think they can extend that Midas touch to a bunch of other things, and that can certainly be folly. I guess one of the things when you're forecasting, when I ask for a forecast, I always ask for line items of revenue types, particularly if we're talking mining services and construction. I like to see line items for different, it might be projects, different customers, and that sort of thing. When you look at that line item process, that's when you might see what's going to work and what should be dropped.
Absolutely. It's really interesting to talk about mining services. Of any industry I know of, they're one of the most practiced at going through boom and bust reactions. As the mining boom comes on, these mining services organizations grow massively. And then the contraction happens, and the contraction happens quickly. So you've got to forecast line by line, because there's different sets of behaviors, different payment terms, different levels of certainty. If you're talking manufacturing, there's different levels of inventory. There's always different levels of working capital.
Yeah.
The other point is, line by line gets you closer to the story of the business. One revenue line is just a set of numbers. A forecast is never a set of numbers. It's a story of what you expect to happen in a business. And if all you can see it is $1 million a month, you lose. It feels like the finance team have taken over and the operations team have been ignored. We always, as you do, look for line by line. We always look for the stories behind the forecast. In fact, I think people often do forecasting the wrong way. They start with the numbers and then figure out the story. We always encourage them to think about the story first. Get away from the spreadsheet, get away from Castaway. Think about the story of what you want to happen, and then you write that story in the numbers.
Yeah. Okay. Now, one of the things about pivoting, if you can see that a particular business model isn't working, whether it's circumstantial because of COVID or otherwise. Jamie, what this is obviously, I assume, a big part of what it is you do. How do you decide what directions a business should pivot in? What are the sort of things that you look for?
Yeah, look, this is something we focus on a lot, and some of the stories that you've mentioned have me thinking about very successful business people who've sold businesses for large amounts of money and then gone out and done something different and then torn up millions of dollars. And that's a pretty consistent pattern. As I mentioned before, it's quite difficult to go into other areas. Now, the one thing that we see is sort of slightly controversial. I think there's been way too much focus on mission, vision, and values. Right? I think those things they're important, but they're important at the margin. The thing that's interesting, you can go to any corporate business and they'll have all the mission and vision and values. Typically, what happens is people breach the values and there's no real recourse for it, so they don't really live. But when you're asking a customer, what is your core competency? You'll be shocked how often they can't answer the question. Right now, if you're going to pivot, what is it that you're actually good at? Where can you pivot to? If you're going to pivot to an area where you've got no core competency at all, then you're not going to succeed. Or it might be that you have core competency that you don't appreciate.
I mean, how do you? I guess is that a process that you go through to try and tease out what the core competencies of the business are that you're dealing with?
Yeah, look, in terms of what we do, it's not a lot of science, but it is a lot of discipline. And the major thing to have a successful business is not to make mistakes. Making mistakes is more damaging than maybe not executing perfectly or not being best practice. So if you can stop the mistakes for start, so when someone goes to go in a different area, and we talk a lot about, we have our core competency, then we have related diversification. I always use the example, a bit like a motor car yard sells cars, but they also service cars. That's a natural sort of synergy. One feeds the other. That makes sense. But if I'm going to start selling garden tools, well, maybe that's a distraction. Maybe that's a different market. So we're always looking for, can I sell another product or service to the same client in the same location? That normally gives me a good sense of where I should try and expand to.
Right.
Yeah, agreed. That idea, interesting about the core competency, it becomes the pivot point, or it becomes the fulcrum around which you should pivot. Effectively, it's like the pin in the middle of your compass. If it's much easier to pivot when you've got a core competency, you can just spin around a little bit as opposed to jumping to a completely different thing. I remember working with a guy years ago. He was a bricklayer, $15 million bricklaying business. He did okay, and thought he was so good at that he should open a boat yard. So he started selling boats.
Okay.
Because that takes capital and that takes sales ability, and it predictably didn't work. You see these they're not pivots actually. They're just flights of fancy in some ways.
Look, we had Peter McAtamaney, who is a wine industry consultant. I think you might know Peter, Michael, actually.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, he was on, 6 or 8 weeks ago, and we were talking a little bit about pivoting. We weren't focusing on it, but it came up sort of in passing. And he made the comment that in the wine industry, there were some wine businesses that were already heavily into digital sales. And online sales and what have you, and there's some businesses that weren't. But he made the comment that he didn't think, and he may fact check me on this, but the way I remember it, he made the comment that he didn't think that in the middle of COVID was necessarily a time to be changing your business model.
I think it's challenging to try and build brand new skills and become expert at it. I think for the last 8-12 weeks, the market has been forgiving. We've all gone onto Zoom, we've gone onto Teams. It's okay to have been rough and ready. It's okay to have been a bit ragged around the edges. But now that we're several months in, business or consumers are going back to, there is a flight to experience. It's the time for changing and switching rapidly is probably past, I reckon. It's hard to learn a brand new skill, although sometimes necessity is the mother of invention.
Right.
Wineries are interesting because they make profit in concentric circles out from home base. They make most profit, get best cash flow and best certainty by selling to their wine list, their member list, and then and sell a door. And the second best is the local region, and the third best is the state. Fourth best is the country. Fifth best, where margins are much tighter, payment terms are much longer, demand uncertainty is much greater. Fifth best is when we go overseas. I think we talk about it internally here. We're looking at stretching to the UK. And the challenge is, where do you put your focus? Do you focus on building in remote markets, or do you start to really focus on owning the local market or becoming much stronger in the local market? Sometimes that chance of growth is alluring.
Yeah, I guess interesting. I mean, I was saying to Jamie before, whether you should be looking at new markets or new products, and it's a 2x2 slide, the old Igor Ansoff. Should you go for new markets to existing products in new markets, or new products in existing markets, that sort of thing. I mean, you mentioned that in the wine trade, it's all about selling to their customer list. So I wonder, Jamie, when you're talking to a customer, if they are looking at looking for new ways of making money, are you, how do you choose between focusing on the existing customer list, maybe with new products, versus expanding the customer list with what you already have?
Well, one of the things that we're big on focusing on is our business has always been, at its core, focused on a customer balance sheet and its capital position, because that really determines where you can go. So to answer that in 2 or 3 different ways, you mentioned before about the winery, is this the time or not the time to expand or change? Now, if you're incurring financial losses, I always work on the theory that a financier will typically allow you gearing to about 3 times. So for every dollar I lose in capital off my balance sheet or my capital structure, right, effectively it's $3 I can't borrow. And that can't be sustained for very long. So if you're making losses, you don't have a choice. You have to arrest that as soon as possible. The other thing that we have seen is I might have a successful business. Maybe I've got 1 store or 1 branch and it's very successful, very profitable, and I open a second one or I buy a second one, suddenly it's not profitable. And we certainly see the dilemma that people have. Well, what do I do? Do I spend my time fixing the broken one and take my eye off the one that's supporting it? And that becomes a real challenge for people. So
you're fighting a war on 2 fronts.
Yeah. So it's around, for us, it's around clarity around decision making, what you do, when, and in what order.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, look, we might. It's been such a fascinating discussion. I think we could talk for a long time. I think we might just wrap up by asking, how do you guys see things unfolding over the next, say between here and Christmas? I mean, are you upbeat? Are you defensive? I'll start with you, Michael. What are your thoughts generally?
In our business, we're certainly upbeat, and I think we practice what we preach, in that forecasting is never about predicting; it's about preparing. So I don't know what's going to happen, but what we've got is we're running 5 different scenarios at the same time, and we understand what we're going to do if each or any of them come to fruition. All of them, we understand tactics. We're looking at far more remote service, so remote customer service. We're looking at becoming an education business on top of the software business to teach people the philosophy and thoughts around forecasting. And maybe we're looking at getting out of the gym game, I think, over the next 6 months. I don't mind spending money. I don't mind money leaking out as long as there's a good reason for it. But we'll see where that leads to.
Yeah, I've often thought I wouldn't mind owning a gym, but not right at the moment, I don't think.
Best way to make a small fortune.
Yeah, right.
Start with a big one and buy a few gyms. No, they're actually very, very great cash flow businesses in the right circumstance. And right now, there will be people coming back who are looking for flexible, low-cost alternatives to working out in their park. And so it's actually a good time for gym ownership.
I've got to say, look, I know I've been having a few meetings in town lately, and I'm not the only one showing up in jeans because the old suit is still a little bit too tight as a result of those COVID kilos. What about you, Jamie? How do you see? What's your take on the near future?
Well, look, I'm relatively optimistic. So I'm looking at this from 2 different perspectives. Now, I look at the JobKeeper payments, and what I see is effectively the government recapitalising a lot of businesses that need it, and that payment is coming in as pure margin. So what it's allowed people the time and space to actually pause and invest in their business. We're seeing a lot of people review systems, and a lot of people review processes. So I'm kind of thinking that it's like someone's pressed pause on the world and given particularly SMEs and those emerging corporates the time and space to actually improve their business and see where they go from there. So then you've got the contrary position where that cash is going to stop and what's going to happen after that. But I think you've got to use this time well, and I'm seeing a lot of people who are. So I'm relatively optimistic around that. We've seen some really nightmare scenarios. So we did an acquisition in the transport industry, and the target customer had 2 large customers. One was a department store supply chain, and the other one was a furniture retailer, right? And so we were horrified about what this might mean. This all unfolded right in the middle of the transaction, and in both those cases, it would appear that discretionary spending's gone up, and those that business is doing spectacularly well. Now, that might not be sustainable, but it's certainly got through a tough period and got through it well.
I guess if someone said to you, if someone had said to us in, say, June, July of last year, look, you're going to have this wonderful opportunity March through September of next year, the government's going to keep your business afloat and you're going to have a chance to work on your business and make it better. Maybe maybe that would have been different. All right. We are going to wrap it up there. I've just had a comment from one of our regular viewers saying that this was the best and most informative interview that we've had. So thank you very much to Jamie Holroyd from West Australia. I really appreciate you sharing your wisdom with us once again. And Michael, it was fantastic to finally have you on. Do drive carefully. Michael's just bought himself a new car, so be careful and be safe. Thank you very much, and thank you very much to our viewers and listeners. And we'll see you again soon. Cheers.
All right. Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers all.